Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into a pretty fascinating period of American history. We're going to be talking about the Industrial Revolution and the rise of cities in America.
Yeah, it's such a pivotal moment, and I think a lot of people, when they think about the Industrial Revolution, they maybe think about Europe or other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But America's transformation during this time is just as dramatic and really significant to world history.
Right. I mean, you think about it, we went from, a mostly rural society to a country dominated by, factories and big cities. So we've had a ton of research lined up to sort of guide us through this journey.
Yeah.
So whether you're, prepping for a presentation or just curious about this era, I think you're going to find this deep dive pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think what's often overlooked is how drastic this shift really was.
Yeah.
Like imagine life before the Industrial Revolution.
Mm,
America was primarily rural. People lived off the land. They relied on agriculture and their own skills to make what they needed. I mean, we weren't completely isolated, but still.
Yeah.
To understand the magnitude of this change, we need to grasp what life was like before machines
Yeah.
took center stage.
Okay, so before we get into, the steam engines and the factories and all that,
Yeah.
can you give us a little bit of a baseline? Like, what was daily life like for the average person before the Industrial Revolution hit America?
Sure, sure. So, as I mentioned, it was primarily an agricultural society. So, most people were involved in farming in some way,
Okay.
whether they were, actually growing crops or raising livestock. And a lot of people also relied on what was called the outwork system.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. That was where families would like make parts of products at home, right? Like I was reading about shoes. Like somebody would sew the top part of the shoe and then they'd send it off to get finished somewhere else.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, the outwork system was a cornerstone of the pre-industrial economy.
Mm.
So you'd have, like you said, shoemakers or weavers or blacksmiths. They'd be working from their homes or small workshops, and then they'd sell their goods locally.
Okay.
And this shift from that kind of decentralized home-based production to centralized factories, it was nothing short of revolutionary. It changed not only how goods were produced, but also where people lived and worked,
Right.
and,
Now,
and how they lived.
so let's talk about those factories then. What were some of the major inventions that really kind of kickstarted this whole Industrial Revolution?
Well, you can't discuss the Industrial Revolution without mentioning the steam engine.
Right.
But it wasn't just any steam engine. James Watt's improved design in the late 1700s. That was the real game changer.
Okay.
I mean, his engine was more efficient, more powerful. It could drive machinery in factories. It could power locomotives for trains and even steamboats.
Wow.
And, that really revolutionized transportation and manufacturing.
So it wasn't just the invention of the steam engine, it was like Watt's improvements that really kind of like,
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. His improvements were key.
like opened up the possibilities.
Precisely. And speaking of revolutionizing industries,
Yeah,
there's the cotton gin.
right. The cotton gin, that sped up cotton production like crazy, but it also had kind of a dark side, right? I mean, didn't it lead to a huge increase in the demand for slave labor in the South?
It did, yeah. The cotton gin presents a very complex historical dilemma.
Hmm.
I mean, while it undoubtedly boosted the textile industry and helped the economy, it also deepened the nation's reliance on enslaved labor
Right.
and tragically intertwined, economic progress with human suffering. So this invention, it really highlights how progress is not always linear.
Yeah.
It can come at a very steep cost.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's kind of like a double-edged sword in a way. Okay, so I've got the steam engine, we've got the cotton gin. What were some of the other big game changers?
Well, alongside these industrial advancements, you had incredible leaps in communication.
Okay.
I mean, the telephone, suddenly messages could be sent across vast distances almost instantaneously.
That's got to be like mind-blowing for people back then.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine, the speed of communication was previously unimaginable.
Mm-hmm.
These inventions broke down geographical barriers and facilitated the exchange of information and ideas like never before. It's like the difference between sending a letter by horseback and sending a text message.
Right.
And the impact on business and politics and even personal relationships was profound,
Yeah.
really profound.
Okay, so we've got faster travel, we got instant communication. What about like daily life? Did anything change there?
Well, think about this, the light bulb.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I know Edison didn't invent the first light bulb,
Right.
But his design was the one that really took off
Hmm.
because it was reliable, it's practical.
Right.
Suddenly people could work and socialize,
Yeah.
long after the sun went down. It's almost like it extended the day.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we take electric light for granted now, but back then it must have been a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the light bulb wasn't just about illumination. It was about extending human activity, increasing productivity, and fundamentally changing the rhythm of life.
Mm.
This seemingly simple invention had a cascading effect on everything from factory schedules to social gatherings.
So all these new technologies, they fuel the growth of factories and businesses, and suddenly cities are, they're booming. People are flocking to these centers of industry, hoping for a better life.
Precisely. It's a mass migration from rural areas to urban centers.
Urbanization.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about cities getting bigger. It was this mass movement of people drawn by the prospect of jobs in factories and the allure of city life.
It must have been pretty dramatic for people, leaving their farms and small towns for the hustle and bustle of a big city. So did everyone who moved to the cities find what they were looking for, or was it more complicated than that?
Well, the reality for many was a far cry from the American dream they were chasing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a story for the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll delve into the other side of the coin, the challenges and maybe the downsides of this rapid urbanization. So stay with us.
Okay, so we've got these cities, it's exploding in size, filled with all these new arrivals seeking their fortunes.
Right.
But it sounds like not everyone struck gold.
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges that people encountered in these rapidly growing urban centers?
Well, you're right. It wasn't all sunshine and roses. One of the biggest challenges was housing. Cities struggled to accommodate this huge influx of new residents, and many people ended up living in really cramped, unsanitary tenements. Yeah, these tenements were a far cry from, the spacious farmhouses that many people had left behind.
Right.
Like I was reading that entire families, they'd be crammed into just 1 or 2 rooms, sharing kitchens and bathrooms with other families.
Yeah, exactly. And with so many people, living in such close quarters, sanitation became a major issue. Garbage piled up in the streets, sewage systems were overwhelmed, and access to clean water was limited.
Wow.
And these conditions created breeding grounds for disease, leading to outbreaks that ravaged these overcrowded communities.
It sounds like a public health nightmare.
Yeah, it was.
It's hard to believe that people were living in such squalor, amidst all this technological progress.
Right.
Were there any efforts to address these issues?
There were, but they were often slow and inadequate in the face of such rapid growth. Social reformers began to highlight the plight of the urban poor, advocating for better housing, sanitation, and public health measures. It was a long and arduous battle, but their efforts eventually led to some important reforms.
Okay, so amidst these challenges, we have this kind of mix of innovation and hardship.
Yeah.
People were drawn to the cities for opportunity, but they also faced these, really difficult living conditions and social problems. Did these experiences, did they change the way people thought about work and opportunity?
Oh, they certainly did. The Industrial Revolution led to the rise of a new working class, and with it, new ideas about labor and social justice began to emerge.
Yeah.
Factory work was often dangerous and demanding, with long hours and low wages.
Yeah, it's a far cry from, the self-sufficiency and
For sure.
Did people just accept these conditions, or was there pushback?
Oh, there was definitely pushback. Workers began to organize, forming labor unions to fight for better wages, safer working conditions, and limits on child labor.
Yeah, speaking of child labor, that's one of the most disturbing aspects of this era. To think that kids, some as young as 6 were working in factories, it's heartbreaking.
It is. It's a stark reminder of the human cost of industrialization. Children were often seen as a cheap and readily available source of labor.
Right.
They were forced to work long hours in dangerous conditions, often for a pittance.
It's hard to imagine that kind of exploitation happening today, at least in the United States. Did those early labor movements have any success in improving conditions for workers?
They did, though. It was a long and difficult struggle. Over time, labor unions gained strength, and they were instrumental in advocating for child labor laws, workplace safety regulations, and other reforms that improved the lives of working people.
It's inspiring to see how, even in the face of such adversity, people found ways to fight for their rights and create a better future for themselves and their families.
Yeah.
It seems like this era was marked by a lot of social change, not just technological advancements. Were there other social movements happening at the same time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The Industrial Revolution coincided with a period of intense social and political ferment. Along with the labor movement, you had the abolitionist movement fighting to end slavery,
Yeah.
the women's suffrage movement advocating for women's right to vote, and various other reform movements seeking to address social ills.
Wow. So it sounds like people were really starting to question, traditional power structures and demand a more just and equitable society.
Yeah, they were.
Did these movements face much resistance?
Of course, change never comes easily. These movements faced fierce opposition from those who benefited from the status quo. But they persisted, challenging societal norms and laying the groundwork for social progress that would continue well into the 20th century.
So we've got this incredible mix of, technological innovation, economic opportunity, and social upheaval. It's a
Mm,
period of both great promise and great challenges. But how did all this change affect, the fabric of American society in the long run?
that's a great question, and it leads us to the lasting impacts of the Industrial Revolution, which are still felt today. I think we should explore that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, sounds good. So we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at the long-term consequences of the Industrial Revolution and how its legacy continues to shape our world today. Stay with us. All right, so we've talked about, factories popping up, cities growing like crazy, and all the social changes that came with it. It's clear that the Industrial Revolution it was a huge turning point in American history, but its impact, it goes way beyond that, that specific time period. Where do we see its legacy today?
Well, I think the Industrial Revolution, it fundamentally reshaped the American landscape, like literally and figuratively. Let's start with the environment. The demand for resources to fuel all those factories and to build those cities, it led to widespread deforestation and pollution.
We touched on that a bit earlier. It's like this era started this shift in our relationship with the natural world. This move towards like large scale resource extraction, and we're still dealing with that today.
Right, exactly. And a lot of the environmental challenges that we're facing today, from climate change to pollution,
Mhm.
they're in many ways a direct result of those industrial processes that were set in motion during this period. The Industrial Revolution, kind of set a precedent for mass production and consumption that's had a lasting impact on our planet.
It's kind of a sobering thought, but it also, I think, highlights the need for us to find more sustainable ways to live and work.
Yeah.
Are there other areas where the influence of the Industrial Revolution is still felt today?
Oh, absolutely. Think about the way we work, the factory system with its emphasis on efficiency and specialization.
Yeah.
That became the dominant model for production and still influences many industries today.
Yeah, that's true. Even though, like, a lot of jobs aren't as physically demanding as they were back then, in those factories, we still see that legacy of that system in the way work is structured and organized.
Yeah, exactly. And the rise of the Industrial Revolution, it also coincided with a shift towards urbanization. And
Yeah.
and that trend has continued to this day. I mean, more people live in cities now
Yeah.
than ever before.
Yeah.
And a lot of the challenges that cities face today, like overcrowding and traffic congestion and inequality, those can be traced back to that rapid growth of urban centers during the Industrial Revolution.
So it seems like the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't just this moment in time, it was the beginning of a process that is still shaping our world. Its legacy is complex, both positive and negative.
Exactly. We're still grappling with the consequences of this era. But by understanding that historical context, I think we can gain insights into our present and make more informed decisions about the future.
It's like we've been on this archaeological dig, unearthing all these layers of history and seeing how it all connects to our lives today. We started with, people making shoes in their homes, and then we had the steam engine, the cotton gin, the telegraph, the light bulb,
Okay.
and we saw how all these inventions led to, factories and cities popping up everywhere,
Yeah.
people leaving their farms looking for new opportunities. But we also saw the downsides, the poverty, the overcrowding, the disease, the exploitation of workers, including children. And through it all, we saw people fighting for a better life. They organized, they demanded change, and that paved the way for a lot of the labor rights and social reforms that we benefit from today.
It's quite a story, isn't it? A story of
It-
innovation, ambition, struggle, and ultimately resilience.
Yeah. And it reminds us that, history isn't just something that we read about in textbooks. It's alive. It shapes who we are and how we live.
Yeah. Exactly. And by understanding the past, I think we can gain a deeper appreciation for the present and make better choices about the future we want to create.
Well said. It's been a fascinating journey, exploring this pivotal era with you. Thanks to everyone for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking questions.